but this is Krystal Ball, and yes, I believe that is her real name. And they say destroys inflation while talking to Bill Maher. So have a listen to her thoughts around inflation. Involves a small conversation around gas prices as well.
Well, I mean, part of this inflationary problem is because we put too much money into the economy. There's way too much government spending, and that's why we have inflation. So that's a large part of that. It's just basic economics. And
that is not basic economics. We had this thing called a pandemic. We had a supply chain crisis, and by the way, there's a war in Ukraine.
It's played a role.
So to act like the only reason we have problems now is because people got a little bit of money in their bank account is just not honest.
And a little bit of money, they got more than we spent in World War II. So don't act like...
I think I've seen a couple of commentators dispute that and say it's wrong. I think Bill Maher may have a point if he talks about all the money spent during COVID, but not the stimulus packages, which is what they're talking about. So I believe, I haven't seen, but I believe I've heard several commentators say that point that Bill Maher there made about the stimulus, which is what they're talking about, is incorrect.
Hold on.
Hold on. Don't act like, you said don't act. Don't act like we had to react to the pandemic exactly the way we did. We had to spend $6 trillion
but how about the trillions that the Federal Reserve shot at Wall Street? For some reason, people don't get upset about that.
And that
fueled the trillions of dollars the Federal Reserve shot at Wall Street to backstop the stock market and the bond market. No one gets upset about that, even though that was a massive
I don't know what
factor in
you're talking
inflation.
about. What do you mean shot at Wall Street? When are we talking about?
We're talking about buying assets, buying stocks, buying bonds, buying treasury bills so that they expand the balance sheet. This is during the crisis, the coronavirus crisis. When the stock market crashed, that is what the Fed did. They went into action. They shot trillions of dollars.
But the stock market didn't crash during COVID.
Now it's crashing. It's crashing now.
It crashed, and the Fed came in and backstopped it.
So the right-wing commentator there was no crash. Bill Maher, there was no crash. Krystal Ball now educates him about when there was a crash in 2020.
What happened?
It crashed and we never heard about it?
No, it crashed. Go back and look at it. It fell off a cliff. The Treasury bond market stopped functioning, and the Fed took extraordinary action it's never taken in history.
Somehow
no one gets upset.
The first week of
Somehow nobody gets upset about the rich people who got tons of money and tons of support, way more than working class people did. But oh my God, people were able to feed their kids and they had a little bit of money in their bank accounts. It was the worst thing in the world. That is one small part of the inflation story, and is, by the way, not the only thing that we can deal with to get out of this mess.
Well, gas prices.
Is it a small part, Jamie?
Gas prices we can largely attribute to an administration that's been waging war on the fossil fuel industry.
That's ridiculous.
And
they drilled more than everybody. I mean,
that's a talking point.
U.S. production.
No.
Okay, U.S. production is up. It will be at record levels next year. The fossil fuel companies themselves are flush with cash, but will not invest in new drilling because they would rather give it to their shareholders.
So there you go. I mean, there's not too much in there that you can challenge her on. I mean, people can. I mean, she constantly was just saying, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. I mean, I don't know if you've seen that whole clip before, George, but do you want to jump in on that clip before we move through? Because there's more to say.
No, let's go. Keep going.
So this is the thing. She talked about the stock market, right? This is the stock market, and this is in 2020. This is the American date, so it's backwards for us normal people. The third month of 2020, there's the stock market crash. So the point that was being made is even if the stimulus checks did contribute to inflation, far more money was pumped into the stock market by the government to make sure that crash came back quite quickly. So more money was put into, as Krystal is saying, the wealthy people with portfolios, stock market portfolios, got more of a benefit out of government money than anybody did buying a few groceries here and there. So just to show you, that is the stock market crash that we are talking about. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about, and we've played this clip before, and you'll probably find that we'll play this several times before the next election, is that inflation, what is it, right? Krystal Ball wasn't actually saying that what inflation was necessarily. She was saying that what the others were saying was inaccurate. We've had Michael Reder on a few times, this clip on a few times. This is a conversation he's having on the 8 p.m. News Hub show. When was it? It was in April when there was a lot of conversation around inflation and who's responsible for it. And, it's the government's fault. It's about government spending. That was the saying that National was saying, that government spending is causing inflation. There was comments about they've got a spending problem. It's because of they're causing the inflation. So News Hub got on Michael Reder, and Michael Reder is, let me give him his title. He is a former economics advisor to the Reserve Bank. Okay, so there's some credential there. This is what he said about what causes inflation, and more importantly, who is responsible for it.
The blame game well and truly underway here. Where do you sit on that? Oh, pretty clearly the ultimate responsibility rests with the Reserve Bank. They're given an inflation target by the government. They're given independent powers to adjust monetary policy. And poor inflation outcomes, particularly trend inflation, the persistent bits of it, are only the Reserve Bank's responsibility. Whatever the government does in terms of increasing spending or cutting taxes, there are all sorts of things the Reserve Bank has to take into account when it makes its interest rate decisions. And it's quite clear that they and a lot of other people badly misforecast where things were going a year or so ago and had policy in the wrong place. And then when they finally realised that they needed to be raising interest rates in the middle of last year, they were pretty slow to adjust. The responsibility rests with them. Now,
So there you go. Responsibility for inflation is with the Reserve Bank, and there can be some external forces, but ultimately it's the Reserve Bank, and government spending doesn't attribute very much to inflation. To give you another example of this, Ian Bremner was texting over the weekend. Ian Bremner is a political scientist, author. He teaches at Columbia, and this is what he said. In the US, a left government, high inflation. In the UK, a right government, high inflation. In Germany, a centrist government, high inflation. In Italy, everyone in government, high inflation. Wild guess, it's not the government. And I don't think we can probably say it much more clearly than that. That whilst obviously the government is controlling, they're in control of the books, what happens with inflation is ultimately they're not the people who drive the inflation. And there's very little a government can do to change inflation. The Reserve Bank sets interest rates, which are the main driver behind what actually should do to help inflation. The Reserve Bank's changes in the inflation rate don't come into effect until 9 to 12 months after they set them up. What the Reserve Bank got wrong, and this is Michael Redder, you can watch that whole clip yourself if you want to go search for it, says is one of the things they got wrong is they underestimated the number of people that would be working. They thought that the numbers of unemployed would be higher, so they set their interest rates based on that, and they were wrong. And that means for their correction to come, it's going to take 9 to 12 months from when they started to fix it a couple of months ago. So that's where the inflation responsibility lies, ultimately with the Reserve Bank. Now, I want to talk a bit about petrol as well, because you heard in that clip the conversation around petrol prices. And I don't know if you watch Bill Maher. I can see down here that Ben has talked about Bill Maher. I like Bill Maher. Been watching him for years. He definitely ain't perfect, but he often raises a good central left perspective and likes to tease the woke brigade a bit. It's fair, right? He had Kellyanne Conway on a couple of weeks ago, and obviously the talking point in America for right-wing politicians, not that she's a politician, is to talk about gas prices. $6 gas a gallon, $6 gas a gallon, $6. She probably said it 15 times in the conversation through the night. To a point, Bill Maher was joking about it and giving her the answer before she said it. Now, they talked about gas prices in that clip, and I think it's important as well that you could actually look at this tweet and change high inflation to petrol prices, yeah? In the US, left government, high petrol prices. In the UK, right government, high petrol prices. In Germany, centrist government, high petrol prices. In Italy, everyone in government, high petrol prices. In New Zealand, left government, high petrol prices. Wild guess, it's not the government. And that's actually true. It's got very little to do with the government, petrol prices in New Zealand. Around the world, if it's a trend that's happening around the world, it's very hard to hold responsible your political party to do that, your government to do that. Now, if you want to hold them responsible for not putting out some ways to help, that's fine. Like, let's say, wiping all the tax off, which would be a disaster, but, to try and address it. But the actual cost of the petrol has very little, again, to do with the government. And let me give you an example of why this is, or how this is. So this is the price of crude oil for the last 20 years. Right here is where petrol was pretty much at its highest it's been in the last 20 years. June of 2008, $187 a barrel. All right? This is where we are now, $108, $110 a barrel, round figures, $114 a barrel. Let's call it 110 because I think it's 108 right now, $110 a barrel. Now, in 2008, when it was, what is that then, a third higher, even more than that, a third higher, the price of petrol in New Zealand was $2.18. Now, if if oil's more expensive, yet petrol's cheaper, something's going on. Because if the cost of fuel comes back to the cost of crude oil, it should have been more expensive in 2008, but it wasn't. It was cheaper by about a third, about $1 cheaper per litre. And I'll tell you why that is. I have the answer. I'll feed you baby birds. What happened when I should bring it back up actually, because I'll show you exactly where it was. What happened when the price of crude oil crashed right here, right when COVID kicked in 2020? See, it's down at $20-something a barrel. What happened when crude oil prices crashed is the people who produced the petrol, they pulled back on their production because petrol wasn't being used, because we were all locked in our house for between 4 weeks and 3 months or whatever it is around the world. So the demand for petrol dropped off. So the producers of petrol, what they did was they stopped producing as much. And guess what? They haven't increased their production numbers since. So what we're seeing right now is an issue to do with production and the producers that they could solve tomorrow. Yeah, someone's talking about Russia and the Ukraine as well. You put that in there, put the war in there as well. But what we're seeing is a production issue that could be changed tomorrow. If you ran a business and you were making more money off producing half as many widgets as you were 5 years ago, then you wouldn't want to produce any more widgets because you're making more money off the half you're producing now. That's the equivalent as to what's happening right now with petrol prices. Half the number, and I'm using half as an example, there's fewer barrels of petrol or fewer litres of petrol have been getting produced since the crash in 2020, and they've never increased that production since. So the people, and you heard Krystal Ball references a little bit when she said the petrol companies are flush with cash because they've got fewer outgoings and they've got more money coming in because the demand is higher, because they haven't increased the production of petrol, which means the price is going up. That's what's driving petrol up, the price of petrol up, and it's the petrol manufacturers that could fix it tomorrow and drive the price back down again.